He handed me divorce papers exactly 2 hours after my mother was lowered into the ground. Not 2 days, not 2 weeks, 2 hours. While I was still wiping grave dirt off my heels and trying to breathe through the suffocating weight of grief, my husband Marcus handed me a thick manila envelope and smiled like he had just won the Powerball. He looked at me with eyes that held zero love and said he was finally cashing out. He thought he was signing the deal of a lifetime. He didn't know he was signing his own financial death warrant. Before I tell you how I made him regret the day he met me, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through a betrayal just to plan your revenge, because trust me, you are going to want to see how this ends. The air in my mother's sprawling Buckhead estate was thick with the heavy scent of lilies and the murmuring of 100 guests. It was the repast, the reception after the funeral, a time that is supposed to be for comfort and community. The house was filled with the people who had loved Dr. Evelyn Vance. There were judges, city council members, and the church deacons who were currently piling their plates with mac and cheese in the dining room. But despite the crowd, I felt completely frozen. My mother was my anchor. She was a powerhouse attorney who had fought her way up from nothing to owning one of the most prestigious firms in Atlanta. And now, standing under the crystal chandelier in the foyer, I felt small. I was 35 years old, a clinical pharmacist with a doctorate, but without her, I felt like a lost child. I stood near the mahogany grand piano, nodding numbly as Auntie Sarah hugged me for the 10th time, her perfume overwhelming my senses. She whispered that God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers. I just wanted to sit down. I looked around the room for Marcus, my husband of 6 years. The man who should have been standing right next to me, holding my hand, fielding these condolences. But he had been missing in action since we left the cemetery. During the service, he had been checking his watch every 5 minutes, tapping his foot like he had somewhere better to be. Then the heavy oak front door slammed open, silencing the hushed conversations in the foyer. In walked Marcus. My stomach dropped. Everyone else in the room was wearing respectful black or deep navy. Marcus was wearing a light gray sharkskin suit that shimmered under the lights. It was loud, it was flashy, it was completely disrespectful. He walked in not like a grieving son-in-law, but like a CEO walking into a boardroom he had just bought. He adjusted his silk tie, scanning the room. He wasn't looking for me. I saw his eyes darting to the oil paintings on the walls, the antique vases, the marble staircase. He was appraising the inventory. He finally spotted me and didn't even offer a sad smile. He just jerked his head toward the library, a sharp, dismissive motion like he was summoning a waitress. "Sophia, library now." That was all he said. His voice carried over the quiet room. Several heads turned. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I excused myself from Auntie Sarah and walked toward the library, my legs feeling like lead. I walked into the room that still smelled like my mother's lemon polish and old books. It was her sanctuary. Marcus followed me in and immediately closed the heavy double doors, engaging the lock with a loud click. The sound echoed in the silence. I turned to him, waiting for an apology, waiting for him to say he was overwhelmed. Instead, he leaned against the door, crossed his arms, and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was boredom. "I am not going to drag this out, Sophia," he said, reaching into his inner jacket pocket. He pulled out a thick yellow envelope and tossed it onto my mother's desk. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right next to her urn. "Sign it. I want to get this filed first thing Monday morning." I stared at the envelope, my brain refusing to process the words. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It is a divorce petition," he said as casually as if he were discussing the weather. "Irreconcilable differences. I am leaving you, Sophia." I felt like the floor had opened up beneath me. "Today," I whispered. "You are doing this today. My mother is not even cold, Marcus. We just buried her." He laughed. It was a dry, cruel sound. "Why wait? The old lady is gone. The shackles are off. Look, let's be real. You are a nice girl, Sophia. You are safe. But you are boring. You are a pharmacist who likes to knit and watch documentaries. I have ambitions. Big ones. I need a woman who fits the future I am building. I need someone with fire. You are just a shadow. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. I saw the greed dancing in his eyes. This wasn't about me being boring. This was about the inheritance. He knew the law. He knew that in Georgia, assets could get complicated. He knew my mother was worth millions. He wanted to blindside me while I was weak force a settlement, or perhaps he thought that by filing now he could argue that he was entitled to a share of the estate as my current husband before the will was even probated. You are a monster, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I am a businessman, he corrected, walking over to the window. And frankly, I am doing you a favor. You can keep your little salary and your little hobbies. I just want what is fair. We have been married 6 years. I put up with your mother's condescending attitude for 6 years. I earned my cut. He wasn't grieving. He was negotiating. He was counting coins on my mother's grave. I felt tears pricking my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were hot tears of rage. I looked past him through the glass panes of the French doors that led to the patio. Standing there just outside the glass was Kyle, my brother-in-law. Kyle was a finance guy, a man who wore too much cologne and always made jokes that weren't funny. He was watching us. He was watching Marcus break my heart. And then Kyle did something that froze my blood. He caught Marcus's eye through the glass and gave him a thumbs up, a big, enthusiastic thumbs up. He smirked, taking a sip of his drink. It hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was a plan, a coordinated strike. They had talked about this. They had probably planned it over beers while I was at the hospice holding my mother's hand as she took her last breath. They were waiting for her to die so they could pounce. My mother's voice echoed in my head clear as a bell. Sophia, people show you who they are. Believe them the first time. And never ever let them see you bleed. I took a deep breath, pushing the sob back down into my chest. I walked over to the desk and picked up the envelope. It felt heavy in my hand. Marcus was watching me, expecting me to collapse, expecting me to beg, expecting the old passive Sophia who just wanted everyone to get along. But that Sophia died 2 hours ago, along with her mother. I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a vase. I simply held the envelope and spoke with a calm that terrified even me. Get out, I said. Marcus blinked, confused by my lack of hysterics. What? I said, get out of my house, Marcus. Take your gray suit, take your envelope, and get out. You want a divorce. You have got it. But you are not spending one more night under this roof. He scoffed, stepping forward aggressively. You can't kick me out. This is my marital home too. I have rights. I walked to the door and unlocked it. I am not kicking you out as your wife, Marcus. I am kicking you out as the executor of this estate. This house belonged to Evelyn Vance, and as of today, you are trespassing. Now leave before I call the security detail my mother hired for the funeral. They are standing right outside, and I think they would love a reason to escort you to the curb. For a second, I thought he was going to hit me. His jaw tightened. His hands balled into fists. But then he looked out into the hallway, saw the burly security guard standing by the entrance, and sneered. Fine, he spat. Enjoy your empty house, Sophia. You will be hearing from my lawyer. We are going to take you for everything you have got. He grabbed his phone and stormed out. I watched him walk down the hallway, signal to Kyle, and the two of them walked out the front door without looking back. I closed the library door and leaned against it, sliding down until I hit the floor. I clutched the envelope to my chest. He thought he had broken me. He thought he had won, but he had no idea what was in my mother's will. He had no idea about the conversation we had the week before she died. He thought he was playing chess, but he didn't even know what game we were playing. I wiped my face, stood up, and smoothed down my black dress. I had a funeral to finish hosting, and tomorrow I had a war to win. I woke up the next morning not to the sound of birds or the peaceful silence I needed, but to the aggressive whir of a power drill and the smell of burnt bacon. For a split second, I forgot where I was. I forgot that my mother was gone. I forgot that my husband had served me divorce papers over her grave. Then the heavy blanket of reality settled over me, suffocating and cold. I threw off the duvet and grabbed my robe, my heart pounding in my chest as the noise from downstairs grew louder. It sounded like a construction site in the middle of my mother's sanctuary. I walked down the winding marble staircase, my hand trailing along the banister my mother had polished every week for 30 years. When I reached the landing, I stopped dead. The foyer, usually pristine and empty, was cluttered with 4 massive suitcases. They were not mine. They were not Marcus's. They were a gaudy, bright orange set that I recognized immediately. Standing in the middle of the living room was Kyle, wearing his shoes on the Persian rug my mother had imported from Turkey. He was holding a laser measuring tape, pointing it at the wall while barking into his cell phone. "Yeah, the layout is dated," he was shouting, ignoring my presence completely. "We are going to have to knock out this load-bearing wall to open up the flow. Buyers want open concept, not these stuffy little rooms. We need to get a crew in here by Tuesday." My blood ran cold. I stepped off the last stair. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mixture of exhaustion and rage. "Who let you in?" Kyle lowered the phone and turned to me, offering a condescending smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, hey, Sophia. Good morning. We didn't want to wake you. You looked like you needed the rest." I looked past him into the dining room. Trina was there wearing a silk kimono that I was fairly certain belonged to my mother. She was standing on a dining chair, reaching up to the wall. In her hands was the oil painting of the Blue Ridge Mountains that my mother had commissioned for her 50th birthday. It was her favorite piece. Trina was wrestling it off the hook. "Put that down!" I snapped, rushing toward her. "Don't you touch her things." Trina rolled her eyes and hopped down, leaning the heavy frame against the buffet table carelessly. "Relax, Sophia. Marcus said we needed to stage the house if we want to get top dollar. This old stuff makes the place look like a museum. It is depressing." She reached into a cardboard box and pulled out a canvas covered in erratic splashes of neon paint. It looked like something a toddler had done in a tantrum. It was her art. Trina called herself an abstract expressionist, which was just a fancy way of saying she had never taken a class and refused to get a real job. "I am hanging this here," she declared, holding up the neon monstrosity. "It brings a pop of color, modernizes the space. You should thank me. Stagers charge thousands for this kind of vision." I felt my hands trembling. "Get out. Both of you. Get your bags, get your trash art, and get out of my mother's house." Marcus walked in from the kitchen, then holding a mug of coffee. My mother's coffee mug. The one with the chip in the rim that she refused to throw away. He took a sip, looking calm and refreshed, as if he hadn't just shattered my life the day before. "They are not going anywhere," Sophia Marcus said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "Kyle and Trina are here to support me." "Support you?" I laughed, a hysterical sound bubbling up in my throat. "Support you in what?" "Looting the dead." "Watch your mouth," Kyle interjected, stepping closer to Marcus. "This is a difficult time for my brother-in-law, too. He is grieving the end of his marriage. He needs family around him. And since this is the marital home, he has every right to have guests." "Marital home," I repeated, looking at Marcus. "You have got to be kidding me. This house is in the estate, Marcus. It is not yours." Marcus set the mug down on a coaster. "Actually, my lawyer says that since we lived here rent-free for the last 2 years, while caring for your mother, and since I contributed to the maintenance, I have established a claim of tenancy and equitable interest. Until the divorce is finalized and the assets are divided, I have just as much right to be here as you do. And I am inviting my sister and her husband to stay. We need the extra hands to get the property ready for listing." I looked at the 3 of them. A united front of greed. Kyle was already back on his phone talking about square footage. Trina was hammering a nail into the wall, cracking the plaster to hang her terrible painting. Marcus was watching me with that dead, calculated stare. "I am calling the police," I said, reaching for my pocket only to realize I had left my phone upstairs. "Go ahead," Marcus challenged, crossing his arms. "Call them. And when they get here, I will show them the divorce filing. I will tell them that my wife is suffering from a severe mental breakdown following her mother's death. I will tell them you are hysterical, unstable, and a danger to yourself." He took a step closer to me, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Think about it, Sophia. You are a pharmacist. You have a professional license to protect. Do you really want a police report on record saying you were mentally unstable and had to be restrained? Do you want the medical board to hear that you are having a psychotic break? Because I will paint that picture. I will tell everyone you are hallucinating, that you are aggressive. I will ruin your career before the ink is dry on the divorce papers." I froze. He knew exactly where to hit. My license was my livelihood. It was the one thing I had that was entirely mine. So Marcus continued, stepping back and raising his voice for his audience. "We are going to do this the easy way. You are going to go upstairs, calm down, and let us handle the business of the estate. Trina is going to redecorate. Kyle is going to maximize the value, and you are going to stay out of the way until we sell. Do we have an understanding?" I looked at Trina, who was now smirking as she hung her neon canvas crookedly on the wall, where my mother's mountain landscape used to be. I looked at Kyle, who was tapping the wall with his knuckles, talking about sledgehammers. I realized then that screaming wouldn't work. Fighting them physically wouldn't work. They were invaders who had already breached the gates, and they were armed with lies that could destroy my future. I had to be smarter. I had to be like my mother. "Fine," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I walked over to the buffet table and picked up my mother's painting. It was heavy, and the frame dug into my palms. "I am taking this to my room," I said. Marcus nodded, satisfied with his victory. "You do that. Just stay out of the way, Sophia. We have a lot of work to do." I turned my back on them and walked toward the stairs. Behind me, I heard Trina laugh. "God, that painting was ugly anyway," she said. "I am doing this house a favor." I gripped the frame tighter, my knuckles turning white. I walked up the stairs, one heavy step at a time, listening to the sound of my home being violated. With every step, the sadness in my chest began to harden into something else. Something cold. Something sharp. They thought they had won because I retreated. They didn't know that I wasn't running away. I was going to my room to sharpen my weapons. If they wanted to play dirty, I would show them what filth really looked like. They wanted to talk about mental instability. I would give them a masterclass in psychological warfare. But first, I had to survive the invasion. I reached the top of the stairs, walked into the guest room because I knew Marcus had probably locked the master suite, and slid the painting under the bed. Then I sat on the floor and waited for the night to come. The war had officially begun. I thought the guest room was the bottom of the barrel, but Marcus was determined to show me that there was always a lower level of hell. By 2 in the afternoon, he was banging on the door like a landlord evicting a squatter. When I opened it, he didn't even look me in the eye. He just pointed to the hallway where my few remaining boxes were stacked. "You need to move this junk," he said. "We have the photographer coming tomorrow morning to take shots for the listing. I need the master suite completely cleared out and staged. And this guest room too. We are going to set it up as a nursery to show potential buyers the family potential of the home." I felt the blood drain from my face. A nursery. He was going to stage a nursery in the room where my mother used to sew. It was a cruel twist of the knife, considering he knew we had tried and failed to have children for years. "Where am I supposed to sleep, Marcus?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the trembling in my hands. He shrugged, checking his cuticles. "The basement is finished. It has a bathroom. It is perfectly livable, Sophia. Besides, it is better if you are down there, out of sight. We don't want you wandering around looking depressing when the realtors come by. It kills the vibe." The basement. He was banishing me to the underground. The space my mother used for storage and where we kept the things we couldn't bear to part with but didn't have room for. It was dark, it was cold, and it was exactly where he thought I belonged, beneath him. I didn't argue. I didn't see the point. Every word I spoke to him now felt like a waste of oxygen. I simply picked up my duffel bag and walked past him. As I passed, I smelled the faint scent of my mother's expensive cologne on him. He had been going through her vanity. He was using her things. The nausea hit me hard, but I swallowed it down. The walk down the basement stairs felt like a descent into a tomb. The air grew cooler with every step, heavy with the scent of damp earth and cedar. When I reached the bottom, I flipped the switch. The fluorescent lights flickered to life, buzzing angrily before settling into a harsh hum. The room was exactly as I remembered it. Stacks of old law books, boxes of files from my mother's early cases, and in the corner, a lumpy beige sofa that we had retired 10 years ago. This was my new reality. I was the widow's daughter, the lawful owner of this estate, and I was sleeping on a discarded couch next to a water heater while my husband played king of the castle upstairs. I set my bag down on the concrete floor and wrapped my arms around myself. It was freezing down here. The central heating didn't quite reach this deep into the earth. I walked over to one of the boxes labeled Evelyn Personal and opened it. Inside was her old cashmere throw blanket, the one she used to wrap around me when I was sick as a child. I pulled it out and buried my face in it. It still smelled like lavender and safety. I curled up on the sofa, pulling the blanket tight around my shoulders, trying to stop the shivering that came from deep inside my bones. But peace was not on the menu tonight. Above me, the floorboards began to vibrate. It started with the heavy thud of bass music, then came the footsteps, a heavy, frantic, pacing. It sounded like a herd of elephants was dancing on my ceiling. Then I heard the distinct pop of a champagne cork, followed by raucous laughter. The vents in the basement were old and metal, and they acted like a perfect acoustic tunnel, carrying every sound from the living room directly to my ears. I could hear them as clearly as if they were sitting next to me. "To the easiest million we will ever make," Kyle's voice boomed. I heard the clink of glasses. "Cheers to that," Marcus replied. "I told you she would fold. Sophia has no backbone. She never did. She is just like her mother without the brains." "Hey, don't insult the dead cash cow." Trina giggled, her voice shrill and grating. At least the old lady had taste. "Have you seen the jewelry in the master bedroom? I am keeping the pearl set. It matches my eyes." I squeezed my eyes shut, tears leaking out and soaking into the dusty sofa cushion. They were going through her jewelry box. They were drinking her wine. They were celebrating the erasure of her legacy. "She didn't even fight back," Kyle mocked. "I thought you said she was smart, Marcus. A doctor of pharmacy or whatever. Book smart, maybe?" Marcus laughed. "But street smart. No. She is naive. She thinks if she plays nice, I will give her a fair settlement. She has no idea I'm going to bleed her dry. By the time I'm done with legal fees and the division of assets, she will be lucky if she can afford a one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs." I heard the sound of liquid being poured. "God, she is so pathetic," Trina added. "Did you see her face when we took the painting down? She looked like a kicked puppy. I almost felt bad. Almost." The laughter erupted again, louder this time. A chorus of cruelty echoing through the bones of the house my mother built. I lay there in the dark, listening to them toast to my destruction. They called me weak. They called me stupid. They called me a doormat. And in that moment, lying on a lumpy couch in a freezing basement, I realized they were right about one thing. The old Sophia was weak. The old Sophia would have laid there and cried herself to sleep, hoping they would eventually develop a conscience. But the old Sophia was gone. I sat up, wiping the tears from my face with the back of my hand. The sadness that had been drowning me for days began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They thought they were dealing with a grieving daughter. They didn't know they were dealing with the daughter of Evelyn Vance, the most ruthless litigator Atlanta had ever seen. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen glowed bright in the dim room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. My thumb hovered over the contacts list until I found the name I needed. Mr. Henderson. He was my mother's oldest friend and her personal attorney. He was the only other person who knew the truth about the estate. I typed out a message, my fingers flying across the screen. Initialize Phase 2. They have taken the bait. Marcus has claimed residency and is moving to liquidate assets. I am ready to sign whatever you need me to sign to trap them. I hit send. Upstairs, the music got louder. They were probably dancing on the dining room table by now. Let them dance. Let them drink their expensive champagne. Let them think they had won the lottery. I lay back down, pulling my mother's blanket up to my chin. For the first time since she died, I didn't feel alone. I felt her spirit in the room with me, not in the ghostly sense, but in the steel that was forming in my spine. Enjoy the master suite, Marcus, I whispered to the ceiling. Sleep well in my bed, because when I am done with you, you won't even have a cardboard box to sleep in. I closed my eyes and listened to the party above me. It didn't sound like a celebration anymore. It sounded like a countdown. And the clock was ticking louder than they could ever imagine. The headache started around midnight, a pulsing rhythm behind my eyes that felt like a warning siren. It was the kind of pain that made your vision blur, a physical manifestation of the stress of sleeping on a lumpy basement sofa while strangers slept in the beds upstairs. I tried to ignore it, burying my face in my mother's cashmere throw, but by 2 a.m, it was unbearable. I needed my migraine medication. The problem was that my prescription was in the medicine cabinet in the master bathroom, the room Marcus had claimed as his command center. I debated suffering through the night, but the throbbing was relentless. I decided to risk it. I would be quiet. I would be a ghost in my own house. I threw off the blanket and crept toward the basement stairs. The concrete was icy under my bare feet. I moved slowly, testing each step, knowing exactly which floorboards in the hallway creaked. My mother and I used to joke that this house had a personality, that it talked to you if you didn't treat it right. Tonight, I prayed the house would keep my secrets. I reached the top of the stairs and the hallway was bathed in moonlight. It was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the settling of the foundation. I tiptoed past the guest room where Kyle and Trina were sleeping. I could hear faint snoring, a sound that made my stomach churn with fresh anger. I pushed past it and headed toward the master suite. But as I approached the double doors of the home office, which sat right next to the master bedroom, I saw a sliver of light spilling out onto the hardwood floor. The door was cracked open just an inch. My mother never left doors ajar. She was a private woman. Marcus, however, was careless. I froze. I should have turned back. I should have gone downstairs and suffered in silence. But then I heard a voice. It was Marcus, but it wasn't the Marcus I had known for the last week. It wasn't the cold, shark-like businessman who threw divorce papers at me at a funeral. It wasn't the shouting tyrant who banished me to the basement. This voice was soft. It was tender. It was the voice he used to use with me when we were first dating, back before the resentment set in. "I miss you too, baby," he cooed. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I was afraid he would hear it. Who was he talking to at 2 a.m? I edged closer to the crack in the door. I knew it was an invasion of privacy, but he had invaded my entire life, so the rules of engagement had changed. I peered through the narrow opening. Marcus was sitting in my mother's leather executive chair, his feet propped up on her mahogany desk. He was holding his phone up, FaceTiming someone. On the screen, glowing in the dim light of the room, was a woman. She was young, devastatingly young, with flawless skin and long, dark hair that fell over her shoulders in perfect waves. She was wearing a silk robe that looked expensive. She was laughing, a light tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. But then the camera on her end shifted. The woman turned the phone toward a crib in the background. A toddler, a little boy with curly hair and chubby cheeks, was standing up, shaking the bars of the crib. Look who woke up, the woman said, her voice dripping with affection. Say hi to Dada. The little boy looked at the screen, waved a chubby hand and squealed. Dada! Dada! The world stopped spinning. The air left my lungs. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle the gasp that tried to escape. Dada. Not uncle, not friend. Dada. Marcus chuckled, a warm, fatherly sound I had never heard from him. Hey there, champ. You should be sleeping. You are giving mommy a hard time, huh? He wants his daddy, the woman said, turning the camera back to herself. We both do, Marcus. It has been 3 days. You said this would be quick. I am tired of waiting in this apartment. The baby needs a yard. I know, baby, I know. Marcus soothed. I am looking at the yard right now. It is huge. There is a perfect spot for a swing set near the oak tree. You are going to love it. My knees felt weak. He wasn't just selling the house for cash. He was planning to move them in, or buy a new place with my inheritance. He was building a life with them on the ashes of mine. How much longer, the woman whined. Marcus sighed, running a hand over his face. 2 weeks, maybe less. The old pharmacist is breaking. I can see it in her eyes. She is weak, Chloe. She is walking around like a zombie. I have her sleeping in the basement. He laughed then, and it was the cruelest sound I had ever heard. You put her in the basement? The woman Chloe giggled. That is mean. It is necessary, Marcus said. I need her to feel small. I need her to feel like she has no options. Once she signs the power of attorney and the settlement agreement, we are golden. I have a buyer lined up for the property. Cash deal. Once the ink is dry, we walk away with $5 million liquid. That is enough to set us up anywhere. Paris, New York. Or we just buy the penthouse downtown like you wanted. 5 million, Chloe breathed. Are you sure she won't fight you? Please, Marcus scoffed. Sophia, she is a coward. She doesn't have the stomach for a fight. She spent her whole life hiding behind her mother's skirt. Now that the old witch is dead, Sophia is lost. She will sign whatever I put in front of her just to make the conflict stop. She is pathetic, really. It is almost too easy. I slid down the wall, careful not to make a sound. Tears were streaming down my face, but they weren't hot anymore. They were freezing cold. 3 years. The boy looked about 2, maybe a little older. That meant the affair started 3 years ago. 3 years of him coming home late. 3 years of missed anniversaries because of work emergencies. 3 years of him telling me that we couldn't afford a vacation while he was likely supporting a second household. 3 years of him making me feel like I was the problem, that I was too boring, too unlovable while he was playing house with Chloe. And he had a child. We had tried for a baby. I had gone through rounds of IVF that failed, leaving me bruised and heartbroken. He had held my hand and told me it was God's will. He told me maybe we weren't meant to be parents. All the while, he had a son across town. The betrayal was so absolute, so comprehensive, that it transcended pain. It felt like my soul was being cauterized. Just hold on a little longer, Marcus was saying. 2 weeks and the boring pharmacist is history. And then it is just you, me, and the champ. I love you, Dada, Chloe said, mimicking the baby's voice. I love you too. Daddy will be home soon with the big check. I didn't stay to hear the rest. I couldn't. If I stayed 1 more second, I would have walked into that room and done something that would have sent me to prison. And prison was not part of the plan. I crawled back toward the stairs. My headache was gone, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like a blade. He thought I was weak. He thought I was a coward. He thought I was boring. He was right about one thing. The Sophia he knew was dead. She died the moment that little boy said Dada. I made it back to the basement and stood in the dark. I didn't cry. I didn't curl up on the sofa. I walked over to the mirror hanging above the utility sink. I looked at myself in the dim light. I looked tired. I looked worn down. But in my eyes there was something new, a fire that hadn't been there before. You want $5 million, Marcus? I whispered to my reflection. You want to buy a penthouse for Chloe. You want to erase me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened the recording app. I hadn't recorded the video, but I had caught the last 2 minutes of audio through the door. The part about the basement, the part about the 5 million, the part about me being a coward. It wasn't enough to stand up in court yet, but it was fuel. It was the gasoline I needed to burn his entire world to the ground. He wanted a war. He wanted to crush the boring pharmacist. I smiled, and the expression looked terrifying even to me. He forgot that pharmacists know exactly how to mix poisons. We know exactly which compounds react violently with others. And we know that the most dangerous things often come in plain, boring packaging. I went back to the sofa, but I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, plotting. He gave me a timeline. 2 weeks. He wanted to close this out in 2 weeks. Okay, Marcus, you have 2 weeks, but you are not going to spend them planning your new life. You are going to spend them walking into the trap I am about to set. And when the steel jaws snap shut, you won't be walking away with $5 million. You will be lucky if you walk away with the sharkskin suit on your back. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in days, I felt peace. Because now I knew the truth. And the truth had set me free to be the monster he accused me of being. The next morning, I walked into the law offices of Henderson and Associates, wearing my black funeral dress and dark sunglasses to hide my swollen eyes. Mr. Henderson had been my mother's attorney for 40 years. He was a man of few words and even fewer smiles, but when I told him about the divorce, filing the invasion of my home, and the secret child Marcus was hiding, his expression darkened into something terrifying. He didn't offer me a tissue. He offered me a strategy. He opened a thick leather binder on his desk and turned it toward me. Sophia, he said, his voice low and gravelly, your mother was the smartest woman I ever knew. She predicted this. She didn't know exactly how Marcus would betray you, but she knew his character. She knew that if you simply inherited the estate directly, he would find a way to bleed it dry through marital claims or emotional manipulation. So 5 years ago, she did something radical. She transferred everything. The house, the investment accounts, the art collection. All of it was moved into the Evelyn Vance Freedom Trust. I looked at the documents confused. What does that mean for me? It means you don't own the house, Sophia. The trust owns the house. And you are the beneficiary, yes, but with a very specific condition. We call it a poison pill clause. He pointed to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. I read the words, and for the first time in days, I felt my lungs expand. The clause stated that the beneficiary, Sophia Vance Williams, would receive a monthly stipend of $500 as long as she remained legally married to Marcus Williams. Full control of the assets and the principal amount would only be transferred to her upon the presentation of a certified divorce decree. My mother had protected me from the grave. As long as I was married to Marcus, I was technically poor. The millions he was chasing didn't belong to me yet. They were locked in a vault that only his departure could open. Mr. Henderson leaned back in his chair. Here is the situation. If we reveal this now, Marcus will drag out the divorce for years just to spite you. He will try to attack the validity of the trust. We need him to rush. We need him to think he is winning. You need to make him believe that you are ready to fold. You need to be the grieving, broken widow who just wants peace. Can you do that? Can you go back to that house and play the fool? I thought about the baby on the FaceTime call. I thought about Trina touching my mother's paintings. I thought about Marcus calling me boring. I can do it, I said. I will give him exactly what he wants. I drove home with a plan that required an Academy Award-winning performance. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw a dumpster in the front yard. They were throwing things away, my things, my mother's old gardening pots. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, took a deep breath, and put on the mask. I walked into the house with my shoulders slumped, looking at the floor. Marcus, Kyle, and Trina were in the living room looking at paint swatches. When they saw me, the room went quiet. Marcus stood up, ready for a fight. "I am sorry," I said softly, keeping my voice trembling. Marcus blinked. "Excuse me." "I am sorry," I repeated, looking up at him with teary eyes. "You were right, Marcus. I have been emotional. I have been clinging to this house because I miss my mom, but I realized last night that you are right. It is too big for me. It is too much memory. And if our marriage is over, I don't want to fight you. I just want this to be over. I want to move on." The room was silent for a solid 10 seconds. Marcus looked at Kyle. Kyle narrowed his eyes, studying me. "You are agreeing to sell?" Kyle asked, his voice skeptical. "Just like that. Yesterday you were threatening to call the police." I reached into my purse and pulled out the document I had retrieved from my mother's old filing cabinet before I left. It was the original warranty deed to the house from 30 years ago. It looked impressive with the gold seal and the heavy bond paper. It was completely invalid now because of the trust transfer, but they didn't know that. "I found this," I said, handing the deed to Marcus. "It is the deed. I am willing to sign whatever listing agreement you have. I just want my half of the equity, Marcus. I just want enough to buy a small condo and start over. You can handle the rest. You are better at business than I am anyway." Marcus took the deed. I saw his fingers tremble slightly as he touched the paper. This was it, the golden ticket. He looked at the legal description of the property, seeing only dollar signs. Kyle snatched the paper from him, scanning it quickly. He was looking for a trap, but his greed was blinding him. He saw Evelyn Vance listed as the owner. He saw the property lines. He didn't think to check the county clerk's digital records to see if a newer deed had superseded this one. He was too arrogant. He thought I was too stupid to trick him. "Well," Kyle said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "It looks legit. I guess you finally came to your senses, Sophia." "I did," I whispered, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. "I am tired of fighting. I will go make dinner. I know you guys must be hungry after working on the house all day. It is the least I can do." Marcus looked at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. He walked over and patted my shoulder, a gesture that made my skin crawl. "Good girl," he said. "I knew you would see reason. We can get the listing agreement ready for you to sign tomorrow. Why don't you make those steaks that are in the freezer? And open a bottle of red. We have something to celebrate." I went into the kitchen and put on my apron. I could hear them in the living room, their voices loud and excited. They were already spending the money. They were talking about boats. They were talking about trips to Cabo. I took the steaks out of the freezer. I chopped the vegetables with a rhythmic, steady cadence. Chop, chop, chop. I was cooking for the people who were trying to destroy me. I was serving them food while they plotted my demise. Trina came into the kitchen, leaning against the counter while checking her nails. "Make mine medium well," she ordered, not even looking at me. "And try not to burn the garlic bread this time. Marcus says you are a terrible cook." I smiled at her, a genuine smile, because she had no idea that this was the last meal she would ever eat in this house as a guest. "I will make it perfect, Trina," I said, "special just for you." I served dinner in the dining room, placing the plates down in front of them like a servant. I poured their wine. I watched them eat. Marcus cut into his steak, chewed loudly, and grimaced. "A little tough, Sophia," he criticized. "But I guess it will do. You never did learn how to handle a prime cut." I sat at the end of the table, picking at my salad. I watched Kyle inhaling his food grease on his chin. I watched Trina complaining about the wine not being chilled enough. They looked so powerful. They looked so secure. Kyle raised his glass. "To the sale," he announced, "and to Marcus for finally shedding the dead weight." They clinked glasses. I raised my water glass and joined in. "To the sale," I echoed. And I meant it. I drank to the sale that would never happen. I drank to the divorce that would make me rich. I watched them gloat, and I felt a deep, warm satisfaction spreading through my chest. Mr. Henderson was right. The poison pill was set. All they had to do was swallow it. And watching them gorge themselves on their own arrogance, I knew they would lick the plate clean. Marcus looked at me, his eyes glassy with wine. You know, Sophia, once this is all over, you will thank me. I am freeing you. You were never meant for this lifestyle. You are simple. You will be happier in a small place. You are right, Marcus, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I will be very happy. You have no idea how happy I am going to be. He laughed, thinking I was agreeing with his assessment of my mediocrity. He didn't see the shark swimming beneath the surface of the water. He just saw the ripples. Eat up, husband, enjoy the meal. It is going to be a long, hungry winter for you. Over the next 3 days, the atmosphere in the house shifted from celebratory to frantic. While Marcus was busy fantasizing about his new life with Chloe, I noticed that Kyle was sweating through his expensive dress shirts. He was constantly pacing on the back patio, smoking cigarettes, chain smoking actually, and shouting into his phone about support levels and liquidation prices. I didn't need a finance degree to know what was happening. The crypto market was crashing, and Kyle was terrified. He wasn't just losing his own money, he was losing money he didn't have. I suspected he was trading on margin using leverage that was now snapping back to decapitate him. I was in the kitchen polishing the silverware because Trina had insisted the forks looked dull when I heard Kyle storm into the living room. He didn't see me, or maybe he just didn't care because to them, I was nothing more than part of the furniture. We have a problem, Marcus. Kyle hissed, his voice tight with panic. My liquidity is tied up. The market took a dip this morning and I have a margin call. I need cash to cover the position until the rebound. It is just a temporary correction, but I need capital now. Marcus looked up from his iPad, where he was browsing luxury condos in Miami. What are you talking about? I thought you said your portfolio was up 200%. It is, Kyle stammered, wiping his forehead with a shaking hand. But these are unrealized gains. Look, I don't want to bore you with the technicals, but if I don't inject cash by Friday, I lose the position. And that means I lose the down payment for your penthouse too. That got Marcus's attention. He stood up, dropping the tablet. What do you mean you lose the down payment? I mean, we need a bridge loan, Kyle said, his eyes darting around the room. Listen, I have a contact. A private lender. Hard money guy. He can authorize a loan against the equity of this house within 24 hours. We just use the estate as collateral. We get the cash. I cover the margin call, the market bounces back next week, and we pay off the loan before the first interest payment is even due. It is free money, Marcus. Marcus hesitated. I don't know, Kyle. We haven't sold the house yet. Is that even legal? Kyle laughed, a desperate manic sound. Of course it is legal. You are the husband. She gave you the deed, remember? She gave you the listing rights. We just need to execute a limited power of attorney so you can sign for the financing on her behalf. She is so out of it she will sign anything you put in front of her. Just slip it in with the realtor disclosures. I stood frozen in the kitchen holding a silver spoon so tight it dug into my palm. A hard money loan. These were loans with predatory interest rates often starting at 15 or 20% meant for desperate house flippers. Kyle was going to gamble the house I grew up in to save his gambling addiction on the blockchain. But then a thought occurred to me. A dark, delicious thought. If Marcus signed for a loan using the house as collateral, he would be committing mortgage fraud because the house belonged to the trust, not to me. And if he took the money and gave it to Kyle, who would inevitably lose it, they would both be on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt that had nothing to do with the estate. I waited for Marcus to answer. Do it, Marcus said finally. Get the paperwork. I am not losing that penthouse. 10 minutes later, Kyle walked into the kitchen. He had regained his composure, smoothing down his hair and putting on his fake smile. He was holding a stack of papers. Hey, Sophia, he said breezily. Just some standard forms for the real estate agent. Disclosures about lead paint mold, that sort of thing. We need your signature so we can get the listing live on Zillow by Monday. He set the stack on the counter. He kept his hand firmly on the top of the papers, flipping the pages up at the bottom for me to sign. Sign here. And here. And initial here. I saw the words power of attorney flashed briefly on the third page. It was hidden between a lead paint disclosure and a property tax release. He was trying to trick me. He thought I was stupid. He thought I wouldn't read. Normally, I would have refused. I would have called him out. But today, I was playing the long game. I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the paper. Is this going to help sell the house faster? I asked, looking at him with wide, innocent eyes. Absolutely, Kyle said, his eyes focused intensely on the pen tip. This is the fast track, Sophia. This gets you your freedom. I signed. I signed my name with a flourish. I signed the power of attorney that gave Marcus the right to encumber the property. I knew it was legally void because I didn't have the right to encumber the trust's property, but the hard money lender didn't know that yet. They were relying on the old deed Kyle had found. Thank you, Sophia. Kyle breathed out, snatching the papers away the moment the ink was dry. You really are helping the family. He ran out of the room like a man whose hair was on fire. That night I went down to the basement and opened my laptop. I logged into my mother's secure email server, which I had been monitoring since the funeral. Sure enough, an email popped up at 3 in the morning. It was a DocuSign notification. Marcus had used the power of attorney. I opened the document. It was a loan agreement from a company called Sharkfin Capital LLC. The terms were horrifying. A $300,000 bridge loan, 18% interest, origination fees of $10,000, and the collateral listed was 1400 Magnolia Lane, my house. I stared at the screen. $300,000. Kyle was in a hole that deep, and Marcus had just signed his name as the guarantor alongside the fraudulent claim of collateral. I could have called the lender right then. I could have sent them the trust documents and stopped the transfer. I could have saved the house from having a fraudulent lien placed on it. But I didn't. I sat back and watched the digital paper trail solidify. If I stopped them now, they would just find another way to hurt me. But this was a felony. This was wire fraud. This was bank fraud. And this was a debt that would follow them for the rest of their lives. I let the email sit in the inbox, marked as unread. The next afternoon, the mood in the house was euphoric. The money had hit their account. I heard the ding of a notification on Kyle's phone, followed by a loud whoop of joy. "We are back in business, baby," Kyle shouted, high-fiving Marcus. "The transfer cleared. I just injected the liquidity. The position is saved." Marcus was grinning, pouring himself a scotch. "You are a genius, Kyle. I admit I was worried, but you pulled it off." I walked into the living room carrying a basket of laundry. "Is everything okay?" I asked, playing the concerned wife. I heard shouting. "Everything is perfect," Sophia Marcus said, raising his glass to me. "Better than perfect. We just secured our future." He had no idea how right he was. He had secured a future of bankruptcy and criminal charges. I smiled and walked past them, heading to the basement. I checked the crypto markets on my phone as I walked down the stairs. The coin Kyle was invested in was down another 12% in the last hour. He had thrown $300,000 of stolen money into a sinking ship. "Let it burn," I whispered to myself. "Let it all burn." I pulled the blanket over me and closed my eyes, imagining the interest ticking up on that loan like a bomb counting down. Tick, tick, tick. Every second they celebrated was another dollar they owed. And when the dust settled and the trust revealed itself, they would realize that they hadn't mortgaged my house. They had mortgaged their own souls. And the payment was coming due very soon. The trap was fully set, and now all I had to do was wait for the party to turn into a funeral. Friday night arrived, and the sanctity of my mother's home was shattered by the thumping bass of house music and the roar of engines. It was supposed to be a strategy dinner, according to Marcus, but what unfolded was a full-blown party. He and Kyle called it a networking event for potential buyers, but the guest list told a different story. It was a parade of Kyle's finance buddies in their shiny loafers, and Trina's influencer friends who walked around live streaming the architecture while making faces at the antique furniture. They parked their Porsches and Mercedes on the grass, ignoring the driveway entirely. I stood in the kitchen arranging canapes on a platter because Trina had fired the catering staff an hour ago, claiming they were too slow. So there I was, the owner of the estate, acting as the unpaid help. I could hear the laughter from the living room. It was that specific kind of high-pitched fake laughter that rich people use when they are trying to impress each other. It made my stomach turn. Then the kitchen door swung open, and Trina breezed in, holding an empty wine glass. She looked me up and down with a sneer. "The guests are thirsty, Sophia. Stop hiding in here and circulate. We need everyone in a good mood if we are going to sell this place. And try to smile. You look like you are at a funeral." "I am at a funeral, Trina. My mother was buried 5 days ago." Trina rolled her eyes. "God, move on already. Here, take this tray. And make sure the VIPs get the good champagne." She shoved a heavy silver tray into my hands loaded with crystal flutes. I wanted to drop it. I wanted to let the crystals shatter on the floor and scream at them to get out. But I remembered the trust. I remembered the loan. I remembered the trap. So I gripped the handles until my knuckles turned white and walked out into the lion's den. The living room was crowded. Smoke hung in the air, drifting up to the chandelier. People were using my mother's coasters as frisbees. A man I didn't know was sitting on the arm of her velvet sofa, spilling crumbs everywhere. Then I saw him. Marcus. He was standing near the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch, looking like the lord of the manor. And standing next to him was a woman I recognized immediately from the FaceTime call. Chloe. Seeing her on a screen was one thing. Seeing her in my house, breathing my air, standing on my floorboards, was a violation so deep it felt physical. She was stunning in a predatory way, wearing a silk dress that clung to every curve. Marcus was leaning in close to her, whispering something that made her giggle and touch his arm. But then my eyes traveled up to her neck and my breath caught in my throat. She was wearing pearls. Not just any pearls. She was wearing a double strand of South Sea pearls with a diamond clasp. My mother's pearls. The ones my father gave her for their 25th anniversary. The ones she had promised to me on her deathbed. I had looked for them in the safe yesterday and found it empty. I thought maybe I had misplaced them. But now I knew. Marcus had stolen them. He had raided a dead woman's jewelry box to decorate his mistress. I felt a wave of dizziness. I walked toward them, the tray shaking in my hands. Marcus saw me approaching and his face hardened. He tapped Chloe on the shoulder and she turned around. Up close, she looked even younger. She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes that held a spark of malice. "Oh, is this the wife?" Chloe asked, her voice sweet like poisoned honey. "Sophia. This is Chloe," Marcus said quickly. "She is my executive assistant. She is helping with the logistics of the move." Assistant. The word hung in the air like a bad joke. "Nice to meet you," Chloe said, not offering her hand. "Marcus says you are being so helpful with everything. It is so sweet of you to be accommodating." She reached out to take a glass of champagne from my tray. As she did, the light caught the luster of the pearls. I stared at them. I couldn't help it. "That is a beautiful necklace," I said, my voice sounding hollow and distant. Chloe touched the pearls, smiling at Marcus. "Oh, thank you. It was a gift. From someone very special. He has exquisite taste, doesn't he?" She was mocking me. She knew. She absolutely knew whose necklace that was. She was wearing my inheritance around her neck like a trophy of war. "Sophia, get the lady a refill," Marcus barked, noticing that Chloe's wine glass was empty. "She prefers the Cabernet." I stood there frozen. "Did you hear me?" Trina appeared at my elbow, digging her nails into my arm. "Get Chloe a glass of red, now." I turned mechanically and walked to the bar cart. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the bottle. I poured the red wine, the dark liquid swirling in the glass. I walked back to them. They were laughing at something Kyle was saying. A happy little family unit. The husband, the mistress, the brother, the sister, and me, the servant. Here, I said, extending the glass to Chloe. Chloe reached for it. Her eyes locked with mine. She smiled a cold, cruel smile. And then, just as her fingers brushed the stem, she jerked her hand. Oops! The glass tipped. The red wine launched forward, splashing across my chest, soaking into my white blouse instantly. The glass shattered on the floor. The room went silent. The cold liquid seeped through to my skin, dripping down my stomach. I looked down at the spreading red stain. It looked like a wound. It looked like I had been shot. Oh my God! Chloe gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth in mock horror. I am so clumsy. I am so sorry, Sophia. She didn't look sorry. She looked delighted. Marcus stepped forward, but not to help me. He reached out and steadied Chloe, grabbing her waist possessively. Are you okay? He asked her, scanning her silk dress. Did it get on you? I am fine, Chloe said, pouting. I just feel terrible. Look at her shirt. She turned to me, her eyes scanning my stained outfit. Well, at least it was just an old cotton shirt, right? It is not like it was expensive. You can probably pick up another one at Target. The room erupted in titters of laughter. Trina snorted, covering her mouth. Kyle shook his head, chuckling. Yeah, Sophia, Kyle called out. Maybe you should switch to sippy cups. You are making a mess of the floor. I stood there, dripping wet, surrounded by strangers who were laughing at my humiliation. My husband was holding another woman, checking her for spots while I stood bleeding red wine. The pearls around Chloe's neck seemed to glow brighter, mocking me. I couldn't breathe. The rage was a physical thing, expanding in my chest, threatening to explode. If I opened my mouth, I would scream. I would lunge at her. I would rip those pearls off her neck. And if I did that, I would lose. I would be the crazy wife, the unstable woman, the one who needed to be institutionalized. I bit my lip. I bit it so hard I tasted copper. It is fine, I managed to choke out. It was an accident. I turned around and walked away. I walked past the snickering guests. I walked past Trina, who whispered clumsy as I passed. I walked into the powder room down the hall and locked the door. I leaned against the sink, staring at myself in the mirror. My face was pale. My eyes were wild. The red stain covered my entire torso. I looked like a victim. I turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on my face, mixing it with the tears that were finally falling. He touched her waist. In front of everyone. He let her wear my mother's pearls. He let her humiliate me in my own home. I gripped the porcelain sink until my fingers ached. Remember the plan, Sophia. Remember the trust. Remember the loan. They were laughing now, but they were dancing on a minefield. I looked at the stain again. It wasn't a wound. It was war paint. I wiped my face with a towel. I didn't try to clean the shirt. I wanted to wear it. I wanted to feel the cold, wet fabric against my skin for the rest of the night. I wanted it to remind me of exactly who they were and exactly what I needed to do. I unlocked the door. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to go back out there. I was going to serve them drinks. I was going to smile at their insults. I was going to let them think they had crushed me completely. Because the lower they thought I was, the less they would see the knife coming. I opened the door and stepped back into the noise. Enjoy the pearls, Chloe, I thought as I walked back toward the kitchen. Enjoy them while you can. Because soon, the only thing you will be wearing is a prison jumpsuit. Monday morning arrived with a tension so thick it felt like the air in the house had been replaced with cement. This was the day we were supposed to sign the official listing agreement with the real estate agent. Kyle was pacing the foyer by 7 in the morning, wearing a suit that looked like he had slept in it. His eyes were bloodshot, and he kept checking his phone every 30 seconds. I knew why. The first payment on the hard money loan was coming up, and the crypto market was still bleeding red ink. He needed to show the lender that the house was on the market to buy himself more time. At 9 o'clock sharp, Mrs. Gable arrived. She was a top-tier luxury agent with hair sprayed into an immovable helmet of blonde curls and a smile that showed too many teeth. She sat at the dining room table, spreading out glossy brochures and contracts. Marcus sat at the head of the table, playing the grieving but pragmatic husband. I sat opposite him, my hands folded in my lap. Mrs. Gable slid the listing agreement toward me. It is a standard exclusive right to sell agreement, Sophia. We are listing at $2.5 million to encourage a bidding war. Once you sign here, we can have the listing live on the multiple listing service by noon. I have 3 cash buyers already waiting for a property in this zip code. Marcus picked up a pen and offered it to me. His hand was steady, but his eyes were cold. Sign it, Sophia. Let's get this over with. Kyle was hovering behind Mrs. Gable, practically vibrating. Just sign it. We don't need to read the fine print. It is standard stuff, right, Mrs. Gable? I took the pen. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at Mrs. Gable with a furrowed brow, playing the part of the confused, overwhelmed widow to perfection. Mrs. Gable, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I want to sign. I really do. But I was reading the probate pamphlet the court clerk gave me yesterday. Doesn't the title company require the original death certificate with the raised seal to close on a sale? Mrs. Gable nodded. Well, yes, eventually. But we don't need it just to list the property. We can handle that during the closing process. I bit my lip, but the pamphlet said that without the original certificate proving the transfer of authority to the executor, any contract signed might be voidable. And there is also the issue of the estate tax clearance letter from the State Revenue Department. Marcus froze. What are you talking about? I looked at him, blinking innocently. You know how Mom was, Marcus. She had assets in 3 different states. I called the tax office this morning just to be sure, and they said we can't legally transfer title until we have the tax clearance letter. If we list it now and accept an offer, we could be sued for fraud if the state puts a lien on the house later. Mrs. Gable frowned, pulling the contract back slightly. She is actually right about the tax clearance. If the estate is complicated, it could take a few weeks to get that letter, and we certainly can't close without a clear title. Do you have the original death certificate handy at least? I let out a shaky breath. That is the other problem. I think I misplaced it. I had it in my purse at the funeral, but with everything happening and the stress of moving to the basement, I can't find it. I think I might have accidentally thrown it out when Trina made me clear out the study. Kyle made a sound like a dying animal. You lost it. You lost the death certificate. I am so sorry, I whispered. I can order another one from the county, but they said it takes 10 to 14 business days for processing because of the backlog. Mrs. Gable stood up, gathering her papers. Well, we can't list the property if you can't guarantee you have the legal authority to sell it yet. We need those documents. Call me when you have the paperwork in order. I don't want to risk my license listing a property with title issues. She walked out the door. The moment the latch clicked shut, the silence in the room shattered. You stupid cow, Kyle screamed, slamming his fist onto the antique dining table. 2 weeks. We don't have 2 weeks. The interest on the loan is compounding daily. The lender wants to see the listing today. It was an accident, I stammered, backing away from the table. I will go look for it again. Maybe it is in the basement. Marcus stood up slowly. He didn't scream. That was worse. He walked around the table, his sharkskin suit rustling. He looked at Kyle, who was hyperventilating, and then he looked at me. Go downstairs, Sophia, he said, his voice dangerously low. I turned and ran toward the basement door. I didn't have to fake the fear this time. I could see the violence radiating off him. I hurried down the wooden steps, my heart hammering against my ribs. I retreated to the far corner of the room, near the old bookshelf where I kept my childhood toys. Marcus followed me down. He slammed the basement door shut and locked it. The heavy thud echoed in the concrete room. He walked down the stairs, slowly unbuttoning his suit jacket. You are lying, he said. You didn't lose that certificate. You are doing this on purpose. You are trying to stall. I am not, Marcus. I cried, backing up until my legs hit the sofa. I swear I don't know where it is. Trina moved everything around. He reached the bottom of the stairs and picked up a porcelain lamp from the side table. It was a delicate thing painted with blue flowers. He looked at it and then hurled it against the wall next to my head. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, sending shards of pottery flying across the room. "Don't lie to me," he roared. "Do you know what you have done? Kyle borrowed money against this house. Hard money. If we don't show progress, they are going to foreclose. They are going to take everything." He lunged at me. I tried to dodge, but he was too fast. He grabbed me by the shoulders and threw me back onto the sofa. The force of it knocked the wind out of me. Before I could scramble away, he was on top of me, his knees pinning my legs down. His hands found my throat. He didn't squeeze hard at first. It was a warning grip, a vice tightening slowly. I looked up into his eyes and I didn't see my husband. I didn't see the man I had shared a bed with for 6 years. I saw a stranger, a desperate cornered animal. "Fix this, Sophia," he spat saliva hitting my face. "You are going to find that certificate. You are going to call the tax office and bribe them if you have to. If that house isn't listed by tomorrow, I'm going to make you wish you were dead." He tightened his grip. My airway closed. I clawed at his hands, my nails digging into his wrists, but he didn't flinch. The edges of my vision started to go black. The only sound in the room was the rushing of blood in my ears and his ragged breathing. "You are worthless," he hissed. "You have always been a burden. Your mother knew it, and I know it. Stop fighting me and do what you are told." He held it for 5 more seconds, 5 seconds that felt like an eternity. Then he released me suddenly, shoving my head back against the cushion. I gasped, sucking in greedy gulps of air, coughing as my bruised throat protested. He stood up, straightening his tie as if he hadn't just assaulted me. "You have 1 hour," he said, looking down at me with disgust. "Find the paper, or I come back down here and we finish this." He turned and walked up the stairs. The door slammed shut and the lock clicked. I lay on the sofa, gasping for breath, tears streaming down my face. My neck throbbed where his thumbs had dug in. I was shaking so hard my teeth chattered. But as the oxygen returned to my brain, the fear began to recede, replaced by a cold, triumphant satisfaction. I sat up slowly, wincing as I swallowed. I wiped the tears from my eyes and looked across the room. On the bookshelf, directly facing the sofa, sat an old teddy bear, Mr. Paws. He was missing an eye and his fur was matted, but he had been sitting in that spot for 20 years. I stood up, my legs wobbling, and walked over to the bear. I reached behind his neck and felt for the small slit in the fabric I had made 3 days ago. I pressed the tiny button on the device hidden inside the stuffing. The recording light blinked off. I pulled out the miniature camera. It was a high-definition spy cam I had bought online the day after the funeral. It had a wide-angle lens. I plugged the SD card into my laptop and waited. The file loaded. I pressed play. The image was crystal clear. The sound was perfect. It showed Marcus storming down the stairs. It showed him smashing the lamp. It showed him throwing me onto the sofa. And it showed him strangling me while threatening my life. I paused the video on the frame where his hands were around my throat. His face was twisted in rage, clearly identifiable. Domestic battery. Assault with intent to do great bodily harm. Terroristic threats. And because he had mentioned the loan while attacking me, he had just tied the violence directly to the financial fraud. I touched my neck. It would bruise. Good. The bruises would match the video. I saved the file to 3 different cloud servers. Then I emailed a copy to Mr. Henderson with the subject line, "The Smoking Gun." I wasn't just stalling anymore. I was hunting. I looked at the shattered lamp on the floor. I looked at the locked door at the top of the stairs. "You want a death certificate, Marcus?" I whispered, my voice raspy and broken. "I will find it for you. But it won't be my mother's. It will be the death certificate for your freedom." I went to the mirror and took a picture of the red marks forming on my neck. Then I sat back down on the sofa and waited. I had the evidence, I had the leverage, and now I was going to watch them panic until the police arrived. The stalling tactic had worked perfectly. He had crossed the line from a bad husband to a felon, and I had it all in 4K resolution. The next morning, Marcus decided that the cleaning service was an unnecessary expense, since he had a wife living in the basement who wasn't contributing to the household income. He ordered me to clean his home office, specifically instructing me to organize his receipts and vacuum the rugs because he had important investors coming later that week. It was just another attempt to demean me, to remind me of my new place in the hierarchy, but as I walked into the room that smelled of stale cigar smoke and his arrogance, I saw it not as a chore, but as an opportunity for reconnaissance. I started organizing the pile of clothes he had thrown over the leather armchair. It was a mess of dress shirts and blazers that he expected me to dry clean. As I picked up his favorite navy blue trench coat, the one he wore when he went on his late-night business meetings, a scent wafted up that made my stomach turn. It was a cloying floral perfume, mixed with the distinct powdery smell of baby wipes. I held the coat up to the light, examining the collar. There, amidst the dark wool, was a single strand of hair. It was not mine. Mine is thick and dark. This hair was fine and light brown, and right next to it was a small dried smear of something that looked suspiciously like spit up. My heart began to race. This was physical evidence. This was the DNA I needed to turn his secret into a weapon. I carefully plucked the hair from the collar and placed it into a small Ziploc bag I had brought from the kitchen. But a single hair wasn't enough to prove paternity. I needed a control sample from Marcus to match it against. I finished cleaning the room quickly, my mind racing with the logistics. I slipped into the master bathroom while Marcus was downstairs arguing with Kyle about the loan interest rates. I grabbed Marcus's toothbrush from the holder. It was damp, meaning he had used it that morning. Perfect. I sealed it in a separate bag. Being a clinical pharmacist has its advantages. I knew exactly which private labs in the city offered expedited genetic testing without asking too many questions, and I knew exactly how to package the samples to ensure they remained viable. I drove to a lab across town, telling Marcus I was going to the grocery store. I paid in cash and requested a rush order. 24 hours. That was all I had to wait. The email arrived the next afternoon while I was folding laundry in the basement. I opened the attachment with trembling fingers. The probability of paternity was 99.9%. The child whose hair was on that coat was undeniably Marcus's son. I stared at the screen, feeling a grim satisfaction. I had the smoking gun, but simply showing it to Marcus wouldn't be enough. He would just deny it or claim I forged it. No, I needed to blow up his support system. I needed to destroy his reputation with the only people he feared more than his creditors, his parents. Bishop and Mother Williams were pillars of the local church community. They were sanctimonious, judgmental people who preached about family values and the sanctity of marriage while looking down on anyone who didn't meet their rigid standards. They loved Marcus because he was their golden boy, their success story. If they knew he had fathered a child out of wedlock and was hiding it while married to me, it would shatter their world. They viewed divorce as a failure, but they viewed adultery and illegitimacy as a mortal sin. I printed 2 copies of the DNA report. I put one in my safe. The other I placed in a plain white envelope along with a photo I had printed from the spy camera footage, showing Marcus arguing with Chloe on FaceTime. I didn't include a note. The evidence spoke for itself. I addressed it to Bishop and Mrs. Williams at their home address, and marked it personal and confidential. I drove to a post office 3 towns over to mail it, so the postmark wouldn't be traced back to me. Then I waited. 2 nights later, the explosion happened. We were sitting in the living room. Kyle was pacing as usual, muttering about Bitcoin support levels, while Marcus was sipping whiskey, trying to look relaxed despite the fact that he was visibly fraying at the edges. Marcus's phone rang. The screen lit up with the word Mom. He sighed, putting on his good son voice. "Hey, Mom. I was just about to call you." He didn't get another word out. Even from across the room I could hear the screeching on the other end of the line. It was a high-pitched wail of outrage that made Marcus pull the phone away from his ear. "Marcus Jeremiah Williams," his mother screamed, her voice shaking with rage. "I have never been so ashamed in my entire life. We just received a package, Marcus. A package that details your filth." Marcus went pale. "What? What package? Mom, calm down. I don't know what you are talking about. Don't you lie to me, boy. His father's booming voice took over the line. We are looking at the test results, Marcus. A child. You have a bastard child living in sin while you are still married to Sophia. We raised you better than this. The bishopric will hear of this. Do you know what this does to our standing in the church? Marcus stood up, knocking his chair over. Mom. Dad, listen. It is a mistake. Someone is messing with you. It is fake. Don't you dare tell me it is fake, his mother sobbed. I saw the pictures, Marcus. I saw the face of that woman. You are an adulterer. You have brought shame upon this family. Do not come to Sunday service. Do not show your face at our house until you have repented and fixed this mess. And don't you dare think we will support you in this divorce now. You are on your own. The line went dead. Marcus stood there holding the phone, the silence in the room deafening. His chest was heaving. He looked like a man who had just been shot. Kyle stopped pacing. What happened? What did they say? Marcus turned slowly, his eyes locking onto Kyle. The look on his face was pure murderous hatred. You told them, he whispered. Kyle blinked, confused. What? Told who? You told my parents. Marcus roared, throwing his glass against the wall. You are the only one who knew Kyle. You and Trina. You told them about the baby. You sent them the DNA results. Kyle threw his hands up, backing away. Whoa, man, are you crazy? Why would I do that? We are in this together. I need you to get the money. Why would I blow up your spot? Leverage, Marcus shouted, advancing on him. You wanted leverage. You wanted to make sure I didn't back out of the loan. You thought if you threatened to expose me, I would sign the papers faster. But you went too far, you idiot. You sent it to my parents. They just cut me off. They were going to loan me the bridge money if the hard money loan fell through. Now I have nothing. I didn't do it. Kyle screamed back, his face red. I swear, Marcus, I am not suicidal. If you go down, I go down. Use your head. Maybe it was her. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Marcus spun around to look at me. I was sitting on the sofa knitting a scarf, looking completely absorbed in my yarn. I didn't look up. I kept my breathing steady, my face a mask of confusion. Sophia, Marcus barked. Did you do this? I looked up, blinking slowly. Did I do what, Marcus? I heard your mom yelling. Is everything okay? Don't play dumb. Did you know about the baby? I frowned, tilting my head. What baby? Are you talking about Trina's pregnancy scare from last year? My voice was steady. My pulse was calm. I looked him dead in the eye and lied with the same ease he had lied to me for 3 years. He stared at me, searching for a crack, but he saw only the boring, naive wife he had dismissed. He looked back at Kyle. She doesn't know anything, Marcus spat. She barely leaves the house. She doesn't even know I have a second phone. It was you, Kyle. You or that big-mouth sister of mine. I didn't. Kyle protested, but his voice was weak. Get out of my face, Marcus growled, pushing Kyle backward. I need to think. I need to fix this. If my parents cut me out of the will, I am dead. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door to his office. Kyle stood there, shaking, looking terrified. He knew the alliance was fracturing. Paranoia had set in. I went back to my knitting, the rhythmic click of the needles the only sound in the room. Knit 1, purl 2, destroy 1, destroy 2. They were turning on each other. The stress of the loan, the market crash, and now the family shame was cooking them from the inside out. Marcus no longer trusted his partner. Kyle was terrified of his partner, and neither of them suspected the woman in the basement. I looked down at the scarf. It was turning out quite beautiful. A perfect shade of funeral black. It would be ready just in time for their court date. I hummed a little tune, the melody of a hymn my mother used to love. The truth shall set you free. But in Marcus's case, the truth was going to bury him. The night before the court hearing felt less like the eve of a legal proceeding, and more like the final quiet moments before a bomb detonation. The air in the house was so heavy with tension that it felt difficult to breathe. Upstairs, the floorboards groaned under the weight of Kyle's frantic pacing. He had been walking back and forth across the living room for 3 hours straight. I could hear his muffled voice shouting into the phone, begging for more time, pleading with the hard money lenders not to send anyone to the house. The crypto market hadn't bounced back. In fact, it had crashed another 8% that afternoon. Kyle was not just broke, he was underwater and the sharks were circling. I sat on my lumpy basement sofa pressing my dress for court tomorrow. It was a sharp, black suit, the kind my mother used to wear when she was about to destroy a hostile witness. I ironed the lapels with slow, deliberate movements, finding a strange calm in the steam rising from the fabric. Upstairs, they were drowning. Down here, I was preparing to breathe. Around 10 o'clock, the heavy footsteps of my husband descended the stairs. He didn't slam the door this time. He didn't stomp. He walked slowly, almost hesitantly. The lock clicked and the door creaked open. Marcus stood at the top of the stairs, silhouetted by the light from the hallway. He held a glass of amber liquid in his hand, and even from the bottom of the stairs I could smell the expensive scotch. He had been drinking to numb the panic. He walked down the stairs, his hand trailing along the rough wooden railing. He looked tired. The bags under his eyes were dark, and his sharkskin suit from the other day was wrinkled. The arrogance that usually rolled off him in waves was subdued, replaced by a jittery, nervous energy. He needed tomorrow to go perfectly. He had no safety net left. His parents had cut him off. His business partner was a liability. His mistress was demanding a penthouse. I was the only variable left in his equation. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked around the basement. He looked at the water heater humming in the corner. He looked at the boxes of my mother's old files. Finally, he looked at me. "Hey, Sophia," he said, his voice slurring slightly. "Getting ready for the big day." I didn't stop ironing. "I am Marcus. I want to look presentable for the judge." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound, and took a long sip of his drink. He walked over and sat on the arm of the sofa watching me. "You know, I have been thinking," he began, swirling the ice in his glass. "This whole thing got ugly, uglier than I wanted. I never wanted to hurt you, Sophia. You have to believe that. I just needed more. I needed a life that fit who I am becoming." I set the iron down and looked at him. He was rewriting history in real time, trying to convince himself that he was the protagonist of this tragedy. "I understand, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice flat. "You have big dreams." "Exactly," he said, pointing his glass at me, liquid sloshing over the rim. "I have vision. And look, I know I have been hard on you this week. The basement, the pressure, but you have to understand the stress I am under. Kyle is a mess. I am carrying the weight of everything right now." He paused, waiting for my sympathy. When it didn't come, he sighed and leaned forward, putting on his best performance of the benevolent patriarch. "Look, Sophia, tomorrow is going to be hard for you. The judge is going to rule in my favor. It is the law. Community property. The house, the accounts, it gets split down the middle. And since I have the debts and the business expenses, I am going to end up with the lion's share of the liquid assets. That is just how the math works." He wasn't explaining the math to me. He was explaining it to himself, trying to make the lie true by speaking it aloud. "But I am not a monster," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I still care about you. We had some good years, right? So I decided something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He tapped it against his knee. "After the assets are divided and the house is sold, I am going to cut you a personal check. $50,000. Tax-free. Just from me to you." I stared at the checkbook. $50,000. It was a fraction of what my mother's estate was worth. It was less than the cost of the car he drove. It was an insult wrapped in a favor. He took my silence for gratitude. "It is enough to get you started," he said magnanimously. You can rent a nice little apartment. Maybe go back to school if you want. I don't want to see you on the street, Sophia. I want you to be okay. I just want you to sign the agreement tomorrow without a fight. If you make a scene, if you drag this out with delays about death certificates or whatever, the deal is off. But if you walk in there and let the judge do his job, that 50 grand is yours. He stood up, swaying slightly, and walked over to me. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers felt cold and clammy. We can end this as friends, Sophia. What do you say? I looked at him. I looked at the man who had cheated on me for 3 years. The man who had a child he hid from me. The man who had mortgaged my house to pay for his brother-in-law's gambling. The man who had strangled me on this very sofa just 2 days ago. He was terrified. He was offering me a bribe because he was scared to death that I would open my mouth in court. He needed me to be the silent, compliant wife one last time. A fire burned in my chest, but I forced it down into the pit of my stomach where I kept all my secrets. I let the corners of my mouth turn up. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the sharp, cold smile of a blade catching the light. Thank you, Marcus. I said, my voice soft and steady. You are generous. Truly. You are showing your true colors right to the very end. He blinked, missing the double meaning entirely. He smiled back, relieved. Good. Good. I knew you would be reasonable. Get some sleep, Sophia. Tomorrow is the first day of the rest of our lives. He turned and walked back up the stairs. He moved with a lighter step, thinking he had just bought his insurance policy for $50,000. I watched him go until the door clicked shut. I turned back to my suit. I picked up the iron and pressed a sharp crease into the trousers. You are right, Marcus, I whispered to the empty room. Tomorrow is the first day of the rest of our lives. But you are wrong about whose life is starting and whose is ending. $50,000. I laughed, a low sound that echoed off the concrete walls. By this time tomorrow you won't even have 50 cents. I finished ironing and hung the suit on the water pipe overhead. It looked like armor. I turned off the light and lay down on the sofa for the last time. I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to Kyle pacing upstairs, listening to the wind howling outside, and visualizing the moment the gavel would fall. I visualized the look on his face. I visualized the ruin. And for the first time since my mother died, I felt completely and utterly at peace. The morning was over. The execution was about to begin. The courtroom smelled of lemon furniture polish and stale anxiety. It was a cold, sterile room with flickering fluorescent lights that hummed a low, monotonous tune. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, wearing the black suit I had ironed the night before. Next to me, Mr. Henderson sat like a stone statue, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on the judge. On the other side of the aisle, Marcus sat next to his attorney, a man named Mr. Sterling, who wore a suit that cost more than my first car and had a smile that looked like it had been sharpened with a whetstone. Marcus looked the part of the grieving, misunderstood husband to perfection. He had traded the flashy sharkskin suit for a somber navy blue one. He kept his head bowed, occasionally dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. It was a performance worthy of Broadway. Behind the wooden railing in the gallery sat the rest of the cast. Kyle was vibrating with nervous energy, his leg bouncing up and down so fast it shook the bench. He was glued to his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen, likely telling the loan sharks that the payout was imminent. And 3 rows back, wearing oversized sunglasses inside a dim courtroom, sat Chloe. She had the audacity to show up. She sat with her arms crossed, chewing gum, looking bored, as if destroying a marriage was just a tedious errand she had to run before lunch. All rise, the bailiff bellowed, and Judge Harrison entered. He was an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a face etched with the weariness of hearing thousands of lies. He sat down, adjusted his robes, and looked over the file. We are here for the dissolution of marriage and the equitable distribution of assets in the matter of Williams versus Williams, the judge said, his voice dry. Mr. Sterling, you may proceed. Marcus's lawyer stood up, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. He walked to the center of the room, commanding the space. He didn't look at me. He looked at the judge, speaking with a smooth, practiced baritone that made the lies sound like gospel. Your Honor, we are here today because my client, Mr. Williams, has been the victim of a cruel discarding. Mr. Sterling began gesturing toward Marcus, who hung his head sadly. For 6 years, Mr. Williams was the rock of this marriage. He supported his wife emotionally and financially. He managed their household. He cared for his ailing mother-in-law, Dr. Evelyn Vance, until her dying day. I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat. Cared for her. He had avoided her room like the plague, only entering to ask when she was going to die. And now Mr. Sterling continued, raising his voice for dramatic effect. Now that Dr. Vance has passed and left a substantial estate, Mrs. Williams seeks to cast her husband aside and hoard the family wealth. But the law is clear, Your Honor. Georgia is an equitable distribution state, and the marital home located at 1400 Magnolia Lane, along with the investment accounts, have been commingled. He paused, letting the legal buzzword hang in the air. Commingled. It was the trap they were banking on. Mr. Sterling walked over to the exhibit table and picked up a stack of papers. We have evidence, Your Honor, that Mr. Williams contributed his own funds to the maintenance and improvement of the property. He managed the contractors. He paid for repairs. He lived in the home as his primary residence. By doing so, the inheritance was transformed from separate property into marital property. Therefore, under the law, Mr. Williams is entitled to 50% of the total estate value, estimated at $15 million. To deny him his share would be to deny his 6 years of sacrifice and labor. He turned to look at me, then his eyes cold and dismissive. Mrs. Williams contributed nothing to the management of these assets. She worked a low-stress job and relied on my client to handle the business of their lives. It is only fair, Your Honor, that the partnership be dissolved equally. I sat there, keeping my face completely blank. Under the table, my fists were clenched so tight my nails were digging into my palms. Low-stress job. I was a clinical pharmacist saving lives in a hospital trauma center, while Marcus played golf and slept with his assistant. The judge nodded, taking notes. He seemed to be following Sterling's logic. It was a standard argument. In many cases, it would have worked. Mr. Sterling called Marcus to the stand. Marcus walked up, looking humble. He swore to tell the truth and sat down. Mr. Williams, tell the court about your role in the marriage, Sterling asked. Marcus sighed, looking at the judge with wide, earnest eyes. I loved Sophia, Your Honor. I still do. I wanted to build a life with her. When her mother got sick, I stepped up. I took over the bills. I managed the estate because Sophia, she just couldn't handle it. She falls apart under pressure. I put my own money into fixing the roof. I paid for the landscaping. I treated that house like it was my own because I thought it was. I thought we were partners. And why did you file for divorce? Sterling asked softly. Marcus wiped a fake tear. Because she shut me out. After her mother died, she changed. She became cold. She told me she didn't need me anymore now that she had the money. It broke my heart, Your Honor. But if she wants to leave, I have to respect that. I just want what is fair. I just want to be able to start over. It was sickening. It was masterful. I glanced back at the gallery. Kyle was smiling now. He stopped bouncing his leg. He held his phone up slightly, and I saw the reflection of the screen in his glasses. He was typing a message. Money hits the account by 5 p.m. He really believed it. He thought the judge was buying it hook, line, and sinker. Judge Harrison looked over his spectacles at Marcus. Mr. Williams, you are stating under oath that you used personal funds to improve the Magnolia Lane property. Yes, Your Honor. Marcus lied smoothly. Thousands of dollars. And you are stating that you and Mrs. Williams operated as a financial partnership. Absolutely, Marcus said. What was mine was hers, and what was hers was mine. That was our vow. The judge nodded again. He looked down at the file and then over at Mr. Henderson. It seems pretty straightforward, the judge muttered. Unless the defense has compelling evidence to the contrary, the court is inclined to view the assets as marital property, subject to equitable division. The duration of the marriage and the residency in the home support the plaintiff's claim. A murmur went through the room. Chloe shifted in her seat, popping her gum loudly. She whispered something to the empty chair next to her, probably planning which color she wanted to paint the penthouse walls. Kyle let out a long, audible breath of relief, leaning back in the bench as if he already owned the place. My heart hammered against my ribs, but Mr. Henderson placed a calming hand on my arm. His grip was firm. He didn't look worried. He looked like a grandmaster who had just watched his opponent move his queen into a trap. "Is it time?" I whispered. Mr. Henderson stood up slowly, buttoning his tweed jacket. He picked up the single thin file folder that lay on the table. It wasn't thick like Sterling's. It didn't have colorful charts or fake receipts. It contained one document. The document my mother had signed 5 years ago. "Your Honor." Mr. Henderson said, his voice rasping like dry leaves. "Before the court rules on the division of assets, the defense would like to clarify the issue of ownership." The judge frowned. "Ownership? Mr. Sterling just established that the couple lived there." Mr. Henderson walked to the center of the room. He didn't pace. He didn't gesture. He just held the folder. "Mr. Sterling established that Mr. Williams lived there, yes. But one cannot claim a share of a property that one's spouse does not actually own." Marcus frowned on the stand. Sterling looked up from his notes, confused. Mr. Henderson continued. "The plaintiff is asking for 50% of Mrs. Williams's inheritance. We are perfectly willing to grant that request." I saw Marcus's eyes light up. He thought we were folding. He thought he had won. However, Mr. Henderson said, turning to face Marcus with a small shark-like smile of his own, "We must inform the court that 50% of 0 is unfortunately still 0. The room went dead silent. The air conditioner hummed loudly. Kyle froze, his thumb hovering over his phone screen. Chloe stopped chewing her gum. Judge Harrison took off his glasses. "Explain yourself, counselor." Mr. Henderson opened the folder. "Sophia Williams does not own the house at 1400 Magnolia Lane. She does not own the investment accounts. She does not own the art collection. All of these assets were transferred 5 years ago into the Evelyn Vance Freedom Trust. An irrevocable trust, Your Honor." Sterling jumped up. "Objection. Surprise evidence. We have a deed." "The deed you have is outdated," Mr. Henderson countered calmly, handing the document up to the judge. "This is the certified transfer of title recorded with the county 5 years ago. And more importantly, Your Honor, there is a specific clause in the trust regarding the beneficiary." He paused, letting the suspense build. I watched Marcus's face drain of color. He looked from his lawyer to me, and for the first time the mask slipped. The grieving husband was gone, replaced by a panicked grifter. The judge read the document, his eyebrows shooting up toward his hairline. "Well, well," Judge Harrison murmured. "This changes things." "It does indeed," Mr. Henderson said. "The trust stipulates that as long as Sophia Williams is married to Marcus Williams, she has no access to the principal or the assets. She is merely a tenant. The assets remain in the trust." "So," Sterling stammered, his confident baritone cracking. "So what? It is still an asset. It is an asset she does not possess." Mr. Henderson said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "And therefore it cannot be divided. The only way Sophia Williams inherits the property is if she is legally divorced. Which means at this exact moment in time, my client is worth exactly $500 in checking account funds. Mr. Williams is welcome to half of that. $250. I have the cash right here in my pocket." Mr. Henderson reached into his pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills, placing them on the defense table. Kyle dropped his phone. The clatter echoed through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. Marcus looked like he was going to vomit. He gripped the railing of the witness stand, his knuckles white, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. The trap had snapped shut, and the sound was beautiful. The courtroom air seemed to drop 10 degrees as Mr. Henderson stood there holding the thin blue folder. It was not a thick stack of billing hours or a chaotic mess of receipts like the one Marcus's lawyer had presented. It was a single crisp document bound in leather. Mr. Henderson walked toward the judge's bench with a slow, deliberate gait that commanded silence. He did not look at Marcus. He did not look at the high-priced lawyer in the expensive suit. He looked only at Judge Harrison, who was peering over his spectacles with renewed interest. "Your Honor," Mr. Henderson began, his voice filling the room like gravel rolling down a hill. "The plaintiff's entire argument rests on the assumption that Sophia Williams inherited her mother's estate upon the moment of death. They argue that because she inherited it, and because she remained married to Mr. Williams for 6 days following the funeral, the assets were commingled." He paused, placing the folder gently on the judge's bench. "However, that assumption is factually incorrect. Dr. Evelyn Vance was a brilliant legal mind. She anticipated that her daughter might one day face a situation exactly like this one. She anticipated that a predator might try to utilize the institution of marriage as a financial weapon. Therefore, 5 years ago, she created the Evelyn Vance Freedom Trust." Mr. Sterling stood up, his face flushing a light shade of pink. "Objection, Your Honor. We have never seen this document. This is trial by ambush. It is a public record," Mr. Henderson countered smoothly. "It was filed with the county clerk and the registry of deeds 5 years ago. Your team simply failed to look for it because you were too busy appraising the furniture." Judge Harrison held up a hand, silencing the sputtering lawyer. He opened the folder. His eyes scanned the pages. I watched the judge's face closely. First there was a frown of concentration, then his eyebrows raised, and then a small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He looked up at Mr. Henderson. "This is a valid, irrevocable trust," the judge said, his voice neutral but laced with amusement. "And the terms are quite specific, extremely specific, Your Honor." Mr. Henderson agreed. He turned to face the courtroom, now looking directly at Marcus. He cleared his throat and began to read from his copy of the document. Article 4, Section B, regarding the distribution of assets. The primary beneficiary, Sophia Vance Williams, shall have no claim, no title, and no access to the principal or interest of the trust assets so long as she remains legally bound in matrimony to Marcus Jeremiah Williams. The words hung in the air. I saw Marcus blink. He tilted his head to the side as if his brain was trying to translate a foreign language. Mr. Henderson continued reading, his voice getting louder and sharper. "The grantor, Dr. Evelyn Vance, explicitly states that the assets are to be held in protective custody by the trust until such time as the beneficiary provides a certified court decree of divorce. Only upon the final legal dissolution of the marriage to Marcus Williams shall the assets transfer fully and completely to Sophia Vance Williams as her sole and separate property." Mr. Henderson closed the folder with a soft snap. He took off his reading glasses and looked at Marcus's lawyer. "So you see, Mr. Sterling, your client is asking for 50% of Sophia's current assets. We are happy to comply. However, since the house, the investments, and the cash are currently owned by the trust and not by Sophia herself, her current net worth consists solely of the funds in her personal checking account." Mr. Henderson reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small clip of cash. "I took the liberty of checking the balance this morning. Mrs. Williams has $500 to her name. Therefore, Mr. Williams is entitled to exactly $250. He placed the bills on the defense table. $200 bills and $150. "Here is your payout, Mr. Williams. Spend it wisely." For a moment there was absolute silence. It was the kind of silence that happens after a car crash before the screaming starts. I looked at Marcus. The transformation was terrifying to behold. The smug, confident mask of the grieving husband didn't just crack, it disintegrated. His face went from a healthy flush to a sickly, translucent gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide, darting from the judge to the money on the table to me. He was doing the math. He had filed for divorce to get the money. But the divorce was the key that unlocked the money for me while simultaneously locking him out forever. My mother had built a vault that only opened from the inside and only after he was gone. He had mortgaged a house he didn't own. He had promised millions to a mistress he couldn't pay. He had destroyed his marriage for a payday that was literally illegal for him to touch. "Wait!" Marcus croaked, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "That can't be legal. She can't do that. It's my house. I lived there. You lived in a property owned by a trust judge." Harrison corrected him, looking down from the bench with cold eyes. "You were a guest, Mr. Williams. A guest who apparently overstayed his welcome." "But I spent money," Marcus stammered, standing up, his legs shaking. "I fixed the roof. I paid for the landscaping." "Then you made a donation to the trust," the judge said, shrugging. "That was very generous of you, but it does not grant you ownership." And then I heard it. From the gallery behind me came a clatter, a sharp plastic crack of a phone hitting the hardwood floor. I turned around. Kyle was staring at the judge, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His mouth was hanging open, his hands were shaking violently at his sides. The phone lay at his feet, screen up. I could see the text notifications still popping up, probably the loan shark asking where the wire transfer was. Kyle knew. In that split second, he understood the magnitude of the disaster. He had borrowed $300,000 against a house that Marcus didn't own. He had committed fraud. Marcus had committed fraud. And now, instead of a $5 million payday to cover their tracks, they were walking away with $250. They weren't just broke. They were criminals. Chloe, the mistress in the sunglasses, seemed to realize that the atmosphere had shifted. She pulled her sunglasses down her nose, looking at Marcus with confusion. "Babe," she whispered loud enough for half the room to hear. "What does that mean? Do we get the money or not?" Marcus spun around to look at her. The veins in his neck were bulging. He looked like he wanted to strangle her. He looked like a rat trapped in a corner, realizing the cheese was actually poison. "We get nothing," he whispered. The reality finally hitting him with the force of a freight train. "We get absolutely nothing." I sat there in my black suit, and I felt a smile spread across my face. It wasn't a nice smile. It wasn't a polite smile. It was the smile of my mother looking down from heaven. Mr. Henderson looked at me and winked. "Your Honor," Mr. Henderson said, turning back to the judge. "Since the assets are not marital property, we move for an immediate summary judgment to finalize the divorce decree. My client is anxious to claim her inheritance, and she can only do that once Mr. Williams is legally removed from her life." "Motion granted," Judge Harrison said, slamming his gavel down. The sound rang through the courtroom like a gunshot ending the war. Marcus collapsed back into his chair. He didn't sit. He fell. He looked at the $250 on the table, the price of his betrayal, the sum total of his greed. I stood up. I felt lighter than air. I picked up my purse and walked past him. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. But as I passed his table, I leaned down and whispered one word. "Checkmate." The sound of the gavel striking the wooden block was the sweetest symphony I had ever heard. It rang through the courtroom with a finality that shattered the tension in the air. Judge Harrison did not hesitate. He looked over the glasses perched on the end of his nose and delivered the verdict that would rewrite my entire future. Based on the evidence presented regarding the irrevocable trust and the clear stipulations of the grantor, the court finds that the assets in question are not marital property. They are the sole and separate property of the trust. Therefore, the plaintiff's request for equitable division is denied. The divorce is hereby granted on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. The marriage is dissolved effective immediately. Case closed. He signed the paper with a quick flourish of his pen. In that split second, a legal alchemy took place. The moment the judge signed that decree, the condition in my mother's trust was triggered. The poison pill dissolved. The handcuffs of poverty fell off my wrists. I was no longer a wife dependent on a $500 stipend. I was Sophia Vance Williams' sole beneficiary and absolute owner of the $15 million estate. The house was mine. The investments were mine. The freedom was mine, Mr. Henderson turned to me, and for the first time in 20 years, I saw him smile a genuine toothy grin. Congratulations, Sophia. You are officially a very wealthy woman. I took a deep breath, letting the reality wash over me. I looked across the aisle at the man who had tried to break me. Marcus was slumped in his chair, staring at the table, as if he could not comprehend the physics of what had just happened. He looked small. He looked deflated. He looked like a man who had bet his life on a pair of twos and lost to a royal flush. But the silence did not last. From the gallery behind us, a low growl started. It was a guttural, animalistic sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I turned just in time to see Kyle launch himself over the wooden railing that separated the observers from the attorneys. He didn't look like a human being anymore. His face was a mask of purple rage, his eyes bulging from their sockets. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Marcus. "You liar!" Kyle screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You swore to me!" He crashed into the defense table, sending papers flying everywhere. Mr. Sterling, the expensive lawyer, yelped and scrambled backward, knocking over his chair in his haste to get away from the lunatic flying through the air. Marcus tried to stand up, raising his hands in a pathetic defensive gesture. "Kyle, wait! Listen to me!" But there was no listening. Kyle tackled him. They hit the floor with a sickening thud, the sound of expensive suit fabric tearing and bones hitting hardwood echoing through the room. "You told me it was a done deal," Kyle roared, punching Marcus in the chest. "I leveraged everything. Do you hear me? I put up my parents' house for that loan. I signed the guarantee." The bailiffs were already moving, shouting orders, but Kyle was possessed by the adrenaline of pure financial ruin. He grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his jacket and slammed his head against the leg of the table. "The money is due today!" Kyle shrieked, saliva flying from his mouth. "The sharks are coming for me, Marcus. They are going to kill me. You said we would have $5 million by noon. Where is it? Where is my money?" Marcus was sobbing now, trying to shield his face. "I didn't know, Kyle. I didn't know about the trust. Get off me!" I stood there watching them roll around on the floor like two rabid dogs fighting over a scrap of meat that didn't exist. It was horrifying, and it was perfect. The facade of the successful businessman and the finance genius had crumbled completely, leaving only two desperate, greedy children playing pretend. Two bailiffs, huge men with thick necks, hauled Kyle off of Marcus. It took both of them to restrain him. Kyle was kicking and thrashing, his eyes wild. "Let me go!" Kyle yelled. "He stole my life. That man is a fraud. We committed fraud. He signed the papers. He knew the house wasn't his." I looked at Mr. Henderson. He raised an eyebrow. "Did he just confess to mortgage fraud on the court record?" Mr. Henderson whispered. "I believe he did," I replied calmly. One of the bailiffs slammed Kyle against the wall, forcing his hands behind his back. The metallic click of handcuffs cut through the noise. Kyle ceased his struggling as the cold steel locked around his wrists. The reality of his situation seemed to hit him all at once. He wasn't just broke. He was going to prison. He looked up, and his eyes locked with mine. "Sophia," he pleaded, his voice suddenly small and broken. "Sophia, please. You have the money now. You can pay off the loan. Please. My parents live in that house. They will be homeless. Don't let them take my parents' house." I looked at him. I thought about the way he had laughed when Trina threw my clothes on the lawn. I thought about him measuring my walls for demolition. I thought about him calling me a stupid cow. I walked over to where he was being held. I stood just out of reach of his spit. "You should have thought about that before you tried to steal my mother's legacy, Kyle," I said, my voice cool and even. "I am not paying a dime of your debt. You gambled. You lost. Take him away, Judge Harrison ordered from the bench, looking disgusted. And add contempt of court to the charges. I want the district attorney notified about the fraud allegations he just screamed on the record. The bailiffs dragged Kyle out. He was weeping now, loud, ugly sobs that echoed down the hallway. Marcus was still on the floor. He sat up slowly, wiping a trickle of blood from his lip. His tie was torn. His hair was a mess. He looked up at me, expecting I don't know what. Mercy, maybe. Or perhaps he thought I would help him up out of habit. I didn't move. Sophia Marcus whispered, reaching a hand out toward me. Baby, please. He is crazy. You saw that. I had nothing to do with the loan. I was a victim too. I looked down at his hand. The hand that had held mine at the altar. The hand that had choked me in the basement. Mr. Henderson stepped between us, blocking Marcus's view of me. Mr. Williams, Mr. Henderson said sternly, you are to have no contact with my client. Any further communication will go through my office. And I suggest you save your breath. You are going to need it to explain to the district attorney why you signed a hard money loan using a property you did not own. Chloe, the mistress, was standing near the door. She had watched the entire brawl with her hand over her mouth. When she saw Marcus bleeding on the floor and Kyle being dragged away in cuffs, she made a decision. She took off the sunglasses. She looked at Marcus, then she looked at me. She didn't say a word. She simply turned on her heel and walked out the door, the sound of her high heels clicking rapidly as she fled the sinking ship. Marcus watched her go. He watched his last hope walk out the door. I turned to Mr. Henderson. Are we done here? I asked. We are done, Mr. Henderson said, closing his briefcase. I turned and walked toward the exit. I stepped over Marcus's legs as if he were nothing more than a piece of trash on the sidewalk. I walked out of the courtroom and into the bright fluorescent hallway. The air out here felt different. It felt lighter. It felt like oxygen. I walked toward the elevators, my head held high. Behind me, the chaos was still unfolding, but it was no longer my chaos. It was a mess I had swept out of my house and into the hands of the legal system. I pressed the down button. I was a divorcee. I was a millionaire. And for the first time in my life, I was truly free. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more stop I had to make, one more scene to play out. I had a house to reclaim, and I had an eviction notice to deliver. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. I checked my reflection in the mirrored wall. The woman looking back at me wasn't the sad, grieving daughter anymore. She was a survivor. She was a warrior. And she was about to go home. The drive from the courthouse to the estate felt like a victory lap, but I did not speed. I drove with the windows down, letting the cool air dry the sweat that had gathered at the nape of my neck during the trial. Behind me, the blue and red lights of a police cruiser flashed silently, a personal escort for the lady of the manor. I had called the precinct on my way out of the courtroom. I told them I had a trespassing situation involving hostile individuals who had previously assaulted me. Given the domestic violence evidence I had emailed to the district attorney, they were more than happy to send a unit to ensure the peace was kept. I pulled into the long, winding driveway of 1400 Magnolia Lane. The house looked different to me now. For the last week it had looked like a prison, a place where I was banished to the basement while vultures picked at the bones of my legacy. But today, the afternoon sun hit the red brick facade and made it glow. It looked like a fortress. It looked like mine. I parked my car and waited for the officers to step out. A locksmith van pulled in right behind them. I had timed this perfectly. I walked up the front steps, the heels of my shoes clicking a rhythm of authority that I had learned from my mother. I didn't knock. I didn't ring the doorbell. I took the key Marcus had tried to wrestle from me days ago and slid it into the lock. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped inside, followed closely by 2 uniformed officers and the locksmith. The scene in the living room was almost comical. Trina was lounging on the sofa, my mother's antique velvet sofa, with her feet propped up on the coffee table. She was drinking a green smoothie and scrolling on her phone, completely oblivious to the catastrophe that had just unfolded downtown. She didn't know her husband was in cuffs. She didn't know her brother was ruined. She looked up, annoyance flashing across her face when she saw me. You are back early, Trina scoffed, not moving her feet. Did the judge kick you out already? I told Marcus he should have just changed the locks on you weeks ago. Then she saw the police officers standing behind me. Her eyes went wide and she sat up so fast she spilled green sludge onto the Persian rug. What is going on? Trina stammered. Why are the police here? I walked over to the coffee table and looked down at her. The time for politeness was over. The time for being the doormat was gone. You have exactly 30 minutes, Trina. I said, my voice calm and cold. Excuse me, she asked, blinking rapidly. You have 30 minutes to pack every single item that belongs to you and get off my property. Officer Miller here is going to supervise to make sure you don't steal any more of my mother's jewelry. If you are not on the curb by the time the clock strikes 3, anything left behind becomes my property, and I will burn it in the backyard. Trina stood up, her face flushing red. You can't do that. Marcus owns half this house. He invited me to stay. I smiled a sharp, dangerous smile. Marcus owns nothing. The judge just ruled. The house belongs to the trust. I am the trust. And you are a trespasser. Now move. Before she could argue, the front door opened again. Marcus stumbled in. He looked like a man who had walked through a hurricane. His navy suit was torn at the shoulder from the fight with Kyle. His lip was swollen and bleeding. He was sweating profusely. He had evidently taken a cab straight from the courthouse, desperate to salvage anything from the wreckage. He saw the police. He saw the locksmith, who was already working on the front door mechanism. He saw me standing over his terrified sister. The reality finally seemed to settle onto his shoulders. The fight went out of him. His knees buckled and he literally collapsed onto the floor. Sophia, he rasped, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. Please. You can't do this. My parents won't answer my calls. They changed their number. Kyle is in jail, Sophia. They set his bail at $500,000 because of the fraud. I have nowhere to go. I looked at him. This was the man who had called me boring, the man who had called me worthless. I checked my watch. You are wasting your 30 minutes, Marcus. I suggest you go upstairs and pack. The locksmith charges by the hour, and he is locking the master suite in 10 minutes. Marcus crawled forward, reaching for the hem of my skirt. I stepped back, avoiding his touch as if he were contagious. Sophia, listen to me, he begged, his voice breaking into a sob. I was brainwashed. It was Kyle. He forced me to do it. He threatened to expose the affair if I didn't help him get the loan. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him. Desperation seized him and he played his final card. The most disgusting card in his deck. Think about the baby, Sophia, he cried, pulling out his phone and holding up a picture of the toddler. Think about my son. He is innocent in this. You always wanted a child. We tried for years. Look at him. He needs a home. Chloe. Chloe isn't a good mother. We can raise him together. We can be a family. I will sign whatever you want. Just don't throw us on the street. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the police officers looked uncomfortable witnessing such a pathetic display. I felt a cold fire in my chest. He was offering me his mistress's child. He was trying to use my infertility, the deepest pain of my life, against me. He thought he could manipulate my maternal instinct to save his own skin. I leaned down until my face was level with his. That child has a mother, Marcus? I whispered, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. And she is not me. You wanted a new family. You wanted a legacy. Well, now you have it. You have a son and you have a mistress. Go be with them. But you are not playing house in my mother's home. I stood up and pointed to the door. Get out. And take your trash with you. Marcus wept openly, now a broken sound that filled the foyer. But he knew it was over. He scrambled up and ran upstairs, followed closely by Trina, who was screaming into her phone, trying to find a friend who would take them in. I stood in the foyer watching the locksmith replace the deadbolt. I watched the officers escort them down the stairs, dragging garbage bags filled with their clothes. As Marcus reached the door struggling with a bag that was splitting at the seams, I called out to him. Wait. He turned, hope flickering in his eyes for a split second. I pointed to the wall in the dining room. You forgot something. He looked confused. That hideous neon painting Trina put up, I said, my voice dripping with disdain. Take it. If I find that trash in my house after you leave, I am billing you for hazardous waste disposal. Trina let out a screech of indignation and snatched the painting off the wall. They dragged their belongings out onto the driveway. It was a pathetic parade. The golden boy and the influencer reduced to refugees on the curb. I walked out to the porch to watch the final act. Just as they dropped their bags on the asphalt, a white Mercedes convertible screeched around the corner. It was Chloe. Marcus's face lit up. He dropped his bags and ran toward the car, waving his arms. Chloe, baby, thank God, he shouted. We need a ride. We need to go to the apartment. It's all gone. The money is gone. But we have each other, right? He reached for the door handle. The door was locked. Chloe rolled the window down just 2 inches. She was wearing her sunglasses. She looked at Marcus's torn suit. She looked at the police cars. She looked at the garbage bags piled on the lawn. She looked at me standing on the porch of the mansion she thought she was going to live in. Where is the money, Marcus? She asked, her voice flat. Marcus stammered. The judge. The trust. It's complicated. But I will fix it. I just need a place to stay. I need to figure out the debt. Kyle put the debt in my name, Chloe. I need help. Chloe laughed. It was a cold, harsh sound. You owe me 3 months of rent, Marcus, she said. The landlord is evicting me on Monday if I don't pay. I thought you were bringing a check. I will get it, Marcus pleaded, banging on the glass. Just let me in. We can go to your mom's house. My mom hates you, Chloe spat. And I don't date broke men with criminal records. Don't call me Marcus. Lose my number. She didn't even look at him again. She punched the gas. The Mercedes tires spun on the asphalt, kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel that coated Marcus's ruined suit. She sped away, leaving him standing there with his hand still reaching out for a door that would never open. He stood alone on the curb. No wife, no mistress, no money, no family. Just a pile of garbage bags and a painting that looked like vomit. I turned to the police officer standing next to me. Officer, if they step 1 foot back onto the grass, arrest them for trespassing. Yes, ma'am, the officer said, tipping his hat. I turned around and walked back into my house. The air inside smelled different. The stench of their cologne and their greed was already fading. I walked to the door and watched the locksmith tighten the final screw on the new deadbolt. I closed the heavy oak door. I turned the new lock. The click was loud and solid. It was the sound of a chapter ending. It was the sound of a vault locking. I was alone in the quiet. And for the first time in 3 years, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like peace. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door and let out a long breath. The eviction was complete, the parasites were gone, and the house was finally mine again. I walked back into the living room and the air felt different. It was clean. It no longer smelled of Kyle's cigarettes, or Trina's cloying perfume, or the heavy oppressive scent of Marcus's betrayal. The afternoon sun streamed through the sheer curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time in a week, the house did not feel like a battleground. It felt like a sanctuary. It felt like home again. I walked over to the corner where Trina had dumped my mother's painting of the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was leaning against the wall, slightly crooked, as if it had been exhausted by the ordeal, just as I had. I picked it up. The frame was heavy solid wood, cool to the touch. I ran my fingers over the brushstrokes, remembering the day my mother brought it home. She had told me that mountains don't move for anyone, they just stand tall and weather the storms. I carried the painting to the dining room. I looked at the blank space on the wall where Trina had hung her neon monstrosity. I lifted my mother's painting and hung it back on its rightful hook. I stepped back to adjust it, making sure it was perfectly level. When I finally let go and looked at it, A wave of emotion washed over me that almost brought me to my knees. It wasn't grief this time. It was relief. It was the feeling of order being restored to a chaotic universe. My mother was gone, but her spirit was back in the room watching over me, protecting the space she had built with her own two hands. I spent the rest of that afternoon walking through every room in the house. I went to the master bedroom and stripped the sheets Marcus had slept on, throwing them directly into the trash. I opened the windows to let the breeze blow through, clearing out the stagnation. I went down to the basement one last time, not to sleep, but to retrieve my things. I packed up my clothes, my books, and the old teddy bear that had held the camera that saved my life. As I walked up the basement stairs, I turned off the light, leaving the darkness behind me forever. I would never sleep on a lumpy sofa again. I would never be relegated to the shadows of my own life again. 3 months passed. The seasons changed from the humidity of late summer to the crisp, golden light of autumn. I stood at a podium in the grand hall of the city university. The room was filled with law students, professors, and local dignitaries. I smoothed the lapel of my suit, a new suit, one that I had bought with my own money, not an allowance from a controlling husband. I looked out at the sea of faces, young, eager, brilliant minds. Many of them, black women, just like my mother, had been 40 years ago. "Welcome," I said into the microphone, my voice steady and strong. "We are here today to honor a legacy." My mother, Dr. Evelyn Vance, believed that the law was a shield for the vulnerable and a sword for the righteous. She believed that intelligence without integrity was meaningless. I paused, looking at a young woman in the front row who was clutching an acceptance letter. "Today, I am proud to announce the official launch of the Evelyn Vance Legal Scholarship Fund. This full tuition grant is designed to support minority students who are dedicated to fighting financial fraud and protecting families from predatory practices." Applause erupted, filling the hall. I clapped along, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that no amount of money could buy. This was what real wealth looked like. It wasn't about buying penthouses or luxury cars or showing off at parties. It was about creating a ladder for others to climb. It was about turning my pain into power for someone else. Marcus had wanted to spend my mother's money on vanity. I was spending it on justice. After the ceremony, I drove my car through the city. I stopped at a red light near a busy intersection. To my right was a car wash, the kind where workers hustle for tips in the hot sun. I glanced over idly, and then I froze. There was a man scrubbing the tires of a muddy SUV. He was wearing a soggy blue uniform that was 2 sizes too big. He looked thinner, gaunt even. His hair was shaved close, likely to hide the fact that he couldn't afford a barber. He wiped sweat from his forehead with a dirty rag and bent back down to scrub the rims. It was Marcus. The sharkskin suits were gone, the Rolex was gone. The arrogance that had defined him was scrubbed away by the harsh reality of minimum wage labor. I learned later from a mutual acquaintance that the judge had been ruthless regarding child support. Since Marcus had acknowledged paternity of Chloe's son, and since he had no assets left after the fraud lawsuits, he had been ordered to pay a significant percentage of his income to support the child he tried to use as a pawn. He was working double shifts just to keep up. He looked up for a second as if he sensed eyes on him, but the light turned green and I drove away. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. He was just a stranger, washing a car, a ghost from a past life that no longer existed. As for the others, justice had been equally poetic. Kyle was currently residing in a state correctional facility. The district attorney had not been lenient. The mortgage fraud charges combined with the assault in the courtroom had resulted in a sentence that would keep him behind bars for several years. His parents had lost their home to foreclosure because of the liens he had placed on it, a tragedy that was entirely his doing. The open concept he had screamed about wanting for my house was now his reality, in a 6x8 cell with a toilet in the corner. And Trina, the influencer who thought she was too good for a job. I heard through the grapevine that she was selling her entire wardrobe on resale apps. The designer bags, the shoes, the jewelry she had flaunted, everything was being liquidated to pay off her credit card debt. She had lost her apartment and was sleeping on a friend's couch, bouncing from place to place, the very definition of the transient existence she had mocked me for when she kicked me into the basement. I pulled into the driveway of 1400 Magnolia Lane. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. The house stood strong and silent against the twilight. I walked inside and locked the door. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine. I walked into the living room and sat on the velvet sofa. I looked up at the painting of the Blue Ridge Mountains. My mother didn't just leave me money. She left me a roadmap. She left me the tools to dismantle a lie and build a truth. She left me the courage to stand in a courtroom and demand what was mine. But the greatest inheritance wasn't the millions in the trust. It wasn't the house or the stocks. It was the freedom. Freedom from gaslighting. Freedom from being made to feel small. Freedom from the crushing weight of trying to please people who would never be satisfied. I took a sip of wine and smiled. The price of that freedom was high. I had to lose a marriage. I had to lose my sense of safety. I had to walk through fire. But as I sat there in the quiet peace of my own home, I realized that the price was worth it. Because freedom isn't free, you have to buy it. And sometimes the currency you use is the removal of the parasites who are sucking you dry. I set the glass down and picked up my knitting needles. I had a new project to start. A blanket. Bright yellow like the sun. No more funeral black. The mourning period was over. The rest of my life was just beginning. If you have ever had to burn a bridge to save yourself, let me know in the comments. If you have ever discovered that your worth was far greater than what your family told you, hit that like button. And remember, the best revenge isn't wishing them harm. It is living so well that you forget they even exist. Thank you for watching my story. Stay strong, stay smart, and never let anyone treat you like a guest in your own life. Sophia's journey is a powerful reminder that true strength often masquerades as silence. While Marcus and Kyle relied on noise, intimidation, and greed, Sophia used strategic patience and the law to dismantle their schemes. Her mother's foresight teaches us that protecting our assets and our peace is an act of profound self-love. We learn that toxic relationships are not destiny, they are merely obstacles to be removed. The most satisfying victory comes not from revenge, but from reclaiming your freedom and proving that your worth was never defined by those who couldn't afford you. Freedom is the ultimate luxury. If you have ever had to outsmart a toxic partner to save your own future, type freedom in the comments below and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice served.